Hello and welcome to the Fervent Four. Did you know that only 4% of businesses ever cross the annual $1 million revenue mark? Hello, I'm Zack Miller, author of Anomaly. With me today, I have my co-host Tim Ryan, lead man at StartWheel.org. Thank you so much for joining us. The Fervent Four is a weekly show each and every Thursday at 11 a.m. dedicated to sharing insights into growing a world-class business. Today, we are joined by a world-class business owner, Dr. Allen Lim of Skratch Labs, who concocted, never used that word before, at least not live on the internet, try and spell that, not going to try, a very fancy coffee he was telling us about just a moment ago. So you started Skratch Labs some time ago. My first question to you is, though you changed Skratch to a K in there and then also didn't buy the domain skratch.com, or at least I don't think you did. Or maybe you did, but why not why add the labs in there and not just go by Skratch? And how do you guys play with that?
Yeah, I think for us, the reason why we called the company Skratch Labs is because we wanted to note this contradiction between heart and head, right? And that, we're very much kind of influenced by this great quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald when he says, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in one's mind and still retain the ability to function," right? One may realize the situation is hopeless, yet still work to make it better. And for us, all of the products that we made were based on evidence-based problem solving, based on science. But at the same time, there was so much emotion and heart. And I think humanity in the sports world that I came from, or just being a human being, and we wanted to recognize that everything great has both your heart and your mind, right? That you could effectively be a rational hedonist. So there was this idea from Skratch that food and drink is better from scratch, but that no matter where you find yourself in life, you can always start from scratch. And there was this acknowledgement with the labs that we could still use our minds, that we could still think, that we could still solve problems. And it was solving problems in a rational, meaningful way with real methodology that brought us to this point.
And in terms of like the origin of Skratch, what was that origin as far as saying, hey, we're gonna make a go at this. This is a passion of mine. How did you get started? What was the mindset when you started the business?
I think in a lot of ways, this was initially an accident and it wasn't initially intentional. I'm trained as an exercise physiologist, and I spent, most of my professional career working as a sports scientist on the pro cycling tour. When I was on the pro cycling tour, there were two major problems that I came into. One was the problem of performance-enhancing drug use in the sport. And there was a real epidemic at the time where athletes had this, I think, false belief that just because something was called performance-enhancing or just because it was a pharmaceutical, that it somehow made your body better than the process of training, resting, sleeping, doing everything you could to become a better athlete. At the same time, training systems were bad, nutrition was bad, all of these kind of fundamentals were bad. So when I came into the sport, I ended up helping to write a grant to the World Anti-Doping Agency that proposed that we could begin to look for changes in biology as opposed to drugs themselves to catch people who might be using performance-enhancing drugs. So, for example, instead of looking for something like human growth hormone, you would take a jaw x-ray. And if the human jawline changed from year to year, the only way that might happen in an adult is if they were taking a drug like HGH. If someone did a blood transfusion, we could look at the ratio of, say, adult red blood cells to reticulocytes or immature or baby red blood cells. And if there were too many adults compared to kids, you knew that something was manipulated. That began to really meaningfully change the sport, at least internally. At the same time, there was still this issue of, athletes complaining that their sports drink, was making them feel sick and just wasn't helping their performance, or that, these dry energy bars were also making them sick and not pleasant to eat, etc. So I started literally roaming the world tour with this rice cooker, making little sushi rice cakes and a little blender blending my own drink mixes. And then I started building out food trucks and hiring world-class chefs. And we really started to double down on the quality of food, nutrition, athlete care. Effectively, I kind of swapped my lab coat for an apron, fundamentally realizing that there was this real need for just human care at that level of sport that these athletes weren't getting, which also included making better food from scratch. Eventually, all of that work led to some great success. I was coaching a team called Garmin. I had 3 riders, 2 in the top 10 and 1 who was breaking the top 10. And this was a year when Lance Armstrong decided to come back. And the athletes I worked with, who were these world-class athletes who had committed to riding and racing the Tour clean, were on par with athletes who, maybe had not viewed the sport in the same way. And I think there was this real kind of head scratcher going on. And one of those guys who was scratching his head was Lance. And after that race, Lance approached me, the 2009 Tour de France, approached me to ask me if I would work with him, coach him. And for me, I think I was always really frightened of Lance and really scared of him. I kind of saw him as centerpiece of what was kind of wrong in terms of ambition and sport, and was fairly intimidated by him, but also had this belief that I was doing work to fight Lance, that he was kind of Darth Vader, and that we were, Luke Skywalker, if you will, this kind of good versus bad narrative. But as I started getting in conversation with him, I realized that, let's say he is the centerpiece of all that is wrong in the doping world. But that if I had this belief in anti-doping, could I forgive him? And could I work with him to make things better? Could he still have the most influence over the sport? And if he could do 1 Tour de France clean, would that change the whole entire ecosystem of the way that sport works? And so maybe there was, a lot of naivete in that, but maybe there was also some commitment to giving people a shot and really, really proving to the world that a clean sport could work. Long story short, I ended up deciding to work with him, but then the federal investigation on Lance started, and I got embroiled in all of that. And it really sucked. I mean, I spent my whole entire career just trying to help make things better. I decided to, help this guy. It was kind of a point of like, wow, for people who didn't know about the sport, it was a big deal because now I'm associated with the best athlete in that sport. But internally, it was also pretty controversial, right? Because of the work that I had done, and people had thought that I had sold out. So it was complicated, right? And there was no easy way to explain my situation to folks. I got embroiled in that investigation, came home from the 2010 Tour de France, and waiting for me at home were a cadre of federal investigators, right? And
just like the movies?
Just like the movies.
Wow.
And it took a while for me to kind of clear my own name in all of this. And in that process, I found that it was really easy for people to shun you. It was really easy for people to just cast you out and say, well, you're the one to blame, and you're, part of all the evil, and I'm going to use you as a scapegoat. And
the internet doesn't make that easier too, right? So like if you just search your name, I mean, it's still there pretty high up there. And it's like, wow, I didn't know any of these things about you until I started researching. I'm just like, look, like whatever, like I care about Skratch, Allen. Like that's it. But the point is like, because of the internet, like a lot of that stuff is going to live forever, I guess.
Yeah, and anyone's opinion about you in a moment is going to live forever, however that opinion is crafted or made. And in a world full of conspiracy theories, I like to joke that I am at the center of every major conspiracy in the world right now. If you connect all the dots on the internet, sorry guys, I'm going to let it happen.
Do you have a conspiracy theory hat? Because if you don't,
my gosh, yeah. You do? That's a great idea, right?
Well, there you go.
And it's funny because I have met a lot of people who have left a lot of nasty comments on the internets about me, and I've met people who have come up and said, yeah, I was just really angry at the time. And I just made this nasty comment about you because I didn't know who else to blame. And I'm sorry. And I'm like, well, you want to go and delete that comment? And they're like, I'm sorry, I can't. It's there forever. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But it's interesting because I have really good friends who, were born out of that conflict and born out of that, maybe angry, that anger and that vitriol. And, I found myself, just trying to figure out what I was going to do next in my life. And I realized that no matter how much I cared about trying to help take care of other people, if I didn't find a way to take care of myself, it didn't really matter. And there was an athlete who I had formerly coached named Ian McGregor, who really cared about me and, was one of the few guys who just didn't abandon me. And he had been injured as an athlete and had begun working for me on different projects when I worked for Lance. And, he stuck by me and we started thinking and talking about the things that we could do with our lives. He was in school for mechanical engineering at School of Mines. And these athletes I had formerly worked with during this time were still calling me and saying, hey, I know you're in a world of hurt, but can you send us a batch of that drink mix? Can you share with us the recipes that you made for us while we were on tour? And initially I was kind of, irritated by it, but then I was like, I'm not doing anything. And they're still my friends. So Ian and I would make up these small batches in a blender and send them off to our friends. And then eventually more and more folks started asking for this stuff. And so we started making bigger batches in these food safe paint buckets. There's a local hardware store in Boulder, Colorado called McGuckin Hardware. And if you buy a branded McGuckin Hardware bucket, they give you a lifetime of free shaking. So we would pre-fill these buckets with all of the ingredients for the drink mix. And then we would go to the hardware store and these dudes in green McGuckin vests would shake the stuff for us.
Is it like a painter, like a thing of paint? Like how big is the bucket?
The bucket is about a 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah,
it's a pretty big bucket, but it's a plastic food safe bucket, and you can shake either sports drink in it or you can shake paint in it. And these guys didn't care or know. They just knew that we came in with a McGuckin Hardware bucket. And we'd show up and they put it in their paint shaker and we had golf balls mixed in there with it so that we could get a homogeneous mix. And
is that why shaker bottles have those little things in them?
Yeah, it's to help break up the particles. It's help to move things around. And that's how we were making this stuff. And we were just largely sending this to our friends who were on the pro cycling tour.
What are they eating then? Like, I mean, so like, I feel like if I was to like think back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you hear all the stories of people eating shit all the time and not having anything good. Like, is that what pro athletes that you were working with on the tour were eating? Were they eating a McDonald's style diet? Was it decent?
Yeah, I think it wasn't really a McDonald's style diet, but it was what I would call a hotel buffet diet.
Got it.
Because you're going from hotel to hotel and you're kind of beholden to the kitchen in that hotel and whatever they might happen to have on that menu. And this is where we started to bring our own food trucks and our own chefs on tour, right? The small investment of $100,000.
Like powdered eggs. People are eating.
It's the worst, right? If the powdered egg buffet thing and you're putting the little, I don't know, the freaking toast through the machine and like, oh my gosh, we're at a Holiday Inn. They got pancake batter or whatever. Like, yeah, so we're on like, I don't know, bad business food.
Yeah. Why like just a general food, hydration, nutrition statement, comment, question. Is it just because like all this food, it just seems like it's so not good for you, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you think about it, but yet it's a huge percentage of our daily diets and it's what's pushed out there. Like what made it acceptable? Is it just because from a marketing perspective, like I've seen someone like a Jesse Itzler push for stuff from like just the cereal that is pushed towards kids and how it's, you know, quote unquote healthy and good for them. He's like, no, it's garbage. Like it's gone through the same ringer that your weed, the weed feed for your grass has gone through. Like this is not good for your kids. Like why has kind of the food world been so allowing, or why have people been so allowing of such bad food to be shoved down our throats?
Yeah, there's a real simple answer to that, and there's a really interesting history to that. And the simple answer to that is population growth. The simple answer is starvation. The simple answer is that around, you know, the turn of the 20th century, say the Gilded Age of America, coming into, you know, the 20th century, let's say 1885 to like 1910, there was a real fear with respect to population growth in America that we were going to starve, that our farms and our agriculture did not have the capacity to feed all of the people who were immigrating and coming to America. And there was this guy named Buckminster Fuller, who was a renowned thinker and scientist, who basically helped to start the industrialization of food in America. And this is where you start to find things like the Harvard Fatigue Laboratory and the, you know, USDA come into play and say, hey, you know, what is the energy expenditure of the average human working on a farm? How much yield can we get out of this plot of land? Can we make enough wheat? Can we preserve our food for a long enough time so that we can not die? And there was all of this good intent in the industrialization of food. And it's the industrialization of food, as opposed to us individually growing our own food, tending to, you know, our animals and being able to literally cook from scratch, that has changed our whole entire food ecosystem, right? And that was, you know, continued to get even bigger during World War II, where now you needed prepackaged food for soldiers, etc. You know, if you think about it, one of the biggest innovations in war was Napoleon canning food, right? Because now he had a supply chain to feed his soldiers. And in a lot of ways, that happened during World War II. It continued into the 50s. It's gotten to a point now where food is so industrialized in America that, you know, what's pushed upon us are not necessarily nutrients, but calories, cheap calories.
Yeah. So you started with the sports drink. How did you go through the evolution of adding products and SKUs to the business? You know, what were the determining factors involved in that? Or
yeah, you know, well, I mean, I'll back up a little bit and say that when we were making the sports drinks for our friends, there was not even a vision to start a business at the time, right?
Yeah.
And certain things push you into that. And what happened for us was that we were making this drink mix for these athletes, and they were secretly using this drink mix in lieu of their, you know,
sponsors,
yeah, because they were having issues with those other drinks. And word got around to different companies that these athletes were using a secret drink mix. And this company came to us and basically said, hey, look, you know, we hear that you've got this secret drink mix. We also hear that you're in this world of trouble right now. How about we buy all the intellectual property around your formulas and ideas? We'll make you a millionaire overnight and you'll be set. And I was like, yes, let's do this. And so initially I was just going to sell these ideas to this company, but I get this contract from them, and nowhere in this contract does it say, you're now a millionaire, please sign here. It was full of all of this jargon that I didn't understand. I hired an intellectual property lawyer to try to suss it out for me and to help educate myself and Ian. And we met at this outdoor cafe called Spruce Confections here in Boulder. And as we were overviewing the contract, a bird flew overhead and literally took a dump on this contract. And so, long story short, you know, Skratch Labs initially started because of a magical bird poop.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
It was for us this kind of omen that seeded a question: can we do this ourselves? Do we have the capacity, not knowing anything about business, to actually even try? And, you know, I flew out to call this whole deal off. And that evening I was at this charity event, and sitting right across from me was Gary Erickson, the founder of Cliff Bar. And I'm like, Gary, I got a story for you about a bird poop. And I shared this story with him, and he shared the story of his founding of Cliff Bar. And, like 3 hours later, we're like all verklempt and like teary eyed and everything. And he's just like, you got to try, like anything is possible. And yeah, I think he was a big inspiration, as was that bird dump, as was that next day. I'm on this bike ride. I bump into my old college roommate, Aaron Foster. And Aaron was at the time working as a stand-up comedian. And I'm like, Aaron, I got a funny story for you. And we laugh about it. Then I ask him this simple question. I'm like, dude, Foster. His name was Aaron Foster. I always called him Foster or Sleepy. And I'm like, dude, Foster, how do we start a business? And he says to me, well, how many pounds of this stuff do you have? And I'm like, well, on a good day, we can make like 100 pounds in the paint shaker. He's like, all right, well, here's what you do. You take your product, you take your 100 pounds, and you sell it for real money. Then you take that money and you put it in this thing called the bank. And then you use the money in the bank to make more product. And you just keep on repeating the process until you make more and more money, put more and more money in the bank. And then he looks at me all seriously and he says, but there's only one rule. There's only one rule you can't break. And I'm like, oh my God, what's the rule? What's the rule? And he's like, dude, you can never spend more money than is in the bank. And I was like, oh my goodness, you are a freaking genius. Do you want to help us start a business? And he was like, yeah, sure. And so Aaron drove out to Colorado, and myself, Aaron, and Ian, we just kind of started bumbling around.
What's that hardware shop? McLaren? What is it called?
McGuckin.
Are they still around?
They're still around. They're family-owned hardware. They're locally owned hardware business.
Are you guys friends? Do they hate you? Like where? Like
they love us. Like on one of our birthday anniversaries, they got a bunch of their employees around their paint shaker, and they took a little picture for us saying,
"Yeah." I mean, I was thinking you can do some small batch, limited small batch release.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing: is that it only worked because they were just a small local business, right? Yeah, they sell Tide detergent there, just like the Target does. But
Sure.
The difference between me buying Tide at McGuckin is that a greater percentage of that dollar stays in my community when I buy it at McGuckin than when I buy it at a big box store, right? And I think it's this localism, especially around Boulder, especially in the food space here, that provided us the mentorship, the knowledge, the access to co-packers, that helped us to really create a real business.
Yeah, Boulder's got they're notorious for their startup scene. Did you get involved in the startup scene, or did you just kind of lay low and do your thing?
We got involved in the startup scene, not from a funding perspective, but from a mentorship perspective. And there was just an ample amount of people that we could ask questions to if we had questions about branding or design or legal aspects of our business or operating systems and things of this nature. There were so many people in our community who were willing to help us and to educate us and to be patient with us and to let us make mistakes, but then also to pick up the phone when we were freaking out. And it was all very, very much appreciated. And it allowed us to grow at our own rate, at our own speed. There's the rate at which money can grow a business, but that doesn't always meet the rate at which human beings can grow, change, and learn, right? Mm-hmm. And so we were very fortunate that the growth of our business was able to pace with the growth of ourselves and our people.
If you're in an elevator with someone, they said, give me the Skratch Labs elevator pitch. What is Skratch?
Yeah, I think we might say that, hey, we're a small sports nutrition company. We make products. For example, we make sports drinks for people who normally hate sports drinks. We make energy bars for people who hate energy bars. We're kind of the more boutique version of what you might find in terms of commodity sports nutrition products. So we're not your GNC, we're not your Gatorade. We're your small shop that has a real niche focus on people who are really serious about their activity and their sport, and who are finding that they're having problems with regular products.
And you bootstrapped this, right?
Yeah, we bootstrapped it. We were pretty ignorant and very, very lucky that we followed some very, very simple rules about business. To Aaron's kind of point, we just didn't spend more money than was in the bank. And what we found in that is that it forced us to solve problems in a unique way. And that maybe And it also forced us to say no to a lot of things that we didn't have the capacity to do. And if you believe in someone like, you know, um, Michael Porter, right, the economist, his whole thing about business and competitive strategy is that you have to be unique and you have to say no. And by accident, because we were cash limited, we had to be unique and we had to say no. As an example, we didn't have a way to be able to pay for us being at expos at big athletic events. If you want to go to a big athletic event that, has thousands of people who gather for like a run or a cycling event, etc., it might cost anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 to just pop up a tent and be able to sample your wares, right? And those field marketing events are super, super impactful because you're catching people in the moment of their need or activity. And so with a friend, Bijou Thomas, who's an incredible chef and restaurateur in town, I was lamenting about this problem. He was like, dude, why don't we just get a food truck, show up to these events? You could make money in real time to pay for the event and at the same time show off your products. And I'm like, that is so crazy. Like, how much does a food truck or trailer cost, and yada, yada, yada. And we figured it out, and we had just enough money to pull this off. And we kind of gambled, and we bought this old used funnel truck from a carnival, like on the, in Virginia or something.
Oh, like a funnel cake truck?
Yeah, exactly. We revamped it. We borrowed a truck from some friends at Nissan. They had like some sort of fleet demo program. We're like, hey, we'll drive your truck to events if you let us borrow it for a year. And they're like, okay, whatever. We pick up this trailer and we started cooking for folks at these athletic events. And we suddenly realized that there was very poor food at these athletic events. You show up to an athletic event and you're not going to get high quality food that you need for the race or for, your recovery or for even before the race. And, we had lines like going out of this place, this little food trailer, and we made enough money to pay for all these field marketing events through that program. It was brutal work though, working in a food truck, but it also gave us an outsized footprint in terms of field marketing that didn't cost us, but that made money.
You brought up the local ecosystem in Boulder being so important to, I think, the growth of Skratch, but you're not a local business from that standpoint where you do get out and you do want it to be purchased by other people. I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. I think a lot of companies that are local, that have a huge local feel, have this problem where it's hard to then take that local brand, that narrative, and then get it out, because they're two different things. If I'm in Boulder, okay, Skratch is easy to do, right? If I'm in St. Louis, I can drink Bud Lights all day because it's local, right? But if I'm in Virginia Beach, Virginia, I'm looking for the Skratch of Virginia Beach, right? So how do you then take that narrative that's done so well in Boulder and push it out to a different location that's not in your kind of local ecosystem?
Yeah. I think that first and foremost, there's an acknowledgement that, at least in business today, you can't always be all things to all people. And I think we got really lucky in that the people who were interested in us initially were very, very affluent, right? And the Boulder community itself is very, very affluent. And so we kind of had this initial goal, which is very small. And it was, let's succeed locally. Let's succeed in this town called Boulder, Colorado, which has a very, very, affluent demographic. And then it was this idea that if we could succeed in Boulder, let's succeed in other places that look like Boulder, right? So we weren't trying to go to places where a $20 bag of sports drink compared to, say, the commodity would be like almost 2 or 3 times the cost. So you start talking about what are all the other target cities. And this is where the food truck came into play. By bringing the food truck, we brought a part of our own selves to these local communities and could create that same vibe. Then there were rep organizations that we started working with that, really understood the local dynamic. And this is where field marketing one city at a time really, really matters. Initially, that field marketer was myself, right? And we focus primarily in these very affluent cities in California. I'm from California, and so I know the landscape, and I was able to just kind of, spend weeks at a time out there and, work events from, one city to another city, right? And that was very, very labor intensive for me initially in terms of time. And then the rest of my team could stay in Boulder and focus on kind of the operations and, getting things actually done. And I could be the kind of face person. Today now what we focus on is our own field marketing teams, and we have field marketing teams that are building out in different regions. We by no means have, total coverage across the United States, but we have enough in certain pockets where our national business is strong, but very much there are certain regions that play better for us than others. Colorado is our number one player, followed by, say, parts of California, parts of the Northeast, Northwest, parts of, say, Texas. But I don't know if our business is, very meaningful in, say, parts of the South or Midwest, right, where we don't have the same demographic, and that's okay for us right now because, again, we had to focus on profit. We had to focus on success where we could, and we didn't have this aim or intention to grow as fast as possible.
So as you have that organic growth and you spread throughout the United States, what do you do from a differentiation standpoint as people just do some research and they see Skratch? What would you say the biggest differentiator is for you or for Skratch?
It's a hard question for me to know because I know the product so well that I will say the major differentiator is the simplicity of the product compared to other products in the same set. That we use the bare minimum of products. We try to, for example, flavor only with fruit instead of, natural or artificial flavoring agents. We don't use food colorings or dyes. And so I would say that it's the simplicity. It's the kind of bare boneness of what you need and not what you don't need. That being said, I think that I don't know if that always comes across in our packaging. If our, we always talk about, does the packaging connote that sense of simplicity, right? Is it, the story? Is it?
Well, that's what RX Bar did really well, right? They were like, oh, it's this, it's 3 dates, it's this, it's that. I think the challenge with you is it's not, the products in there aren't normal things that people understand, right? I mean, if you say, what is it, maltodextrin or something like that? Like there's, I'm trying to think of sciencey words that I've heard in the internet in the last 10 years. Like there are words that are in there that people don't understand. So you put that on the packaging and people look at that like, what the hell?
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard to understand. For example, people don't understand. They understand that when you sweat, you lose electrolytes, right? But nobody really even knows what an electrolyte is. And they don't know that there are different types of electrolytes, and that primarily in the human body, the two most important might be, say, sodium and potassium. But then people don't even know that there are these little pumps on every cell in our bodies that pump sodium out of the cell and potassium into the cell. And so the sweat that is generated from our blood is almost entirely sodium with very little potassium in it. So you get companies that try to sell sport drinks with a high amount of potassium, say, which might be similar to a profile like coconut water. And that's exactly the opposite of what you need when you actually sweat, right? And so having to educate people and having to kind of justify your ingredient label based upon real physiology is for sure a challenge. And so you hope that at least by reputation, word of mouth, etc., that you gain that trust. And I think by and large, we have succeeded because we are a word of mouth company, and that most people's initial access point to our company is through a friend, through someone they trust, through a coach, or at a field event.
I generally don't. I was telling you this earlier. About 2 years ago, I learned about Skratch. after bonking enough off of standard Gatorade, I was doing these 3-hour rides over and over and over again. I'm like, what the hell? Like, this should be getting easier. It's getting harder.
Yeah.
And I'd gotten sick of it. And then somehow I found Skratch. I bought it and it fixed everything. And I've been using it since. I remember this one time Tim and I went on this run like a year ago. I brought him like a little like a Ziploc bag of like a sandwich bag, and I put in like a scoop of Skratch. I don't know if he ever took it.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah,
I was like,
my wife questioned me.
Yeah, like this stuff is amazing. Like, you gotta try this. And then I've told many people about it since, and so, like, you know, it fixed me. I was like, yo, like, everyone needs to learn about this. Like, Gatorade's garbage. Like, it's not going to fix a damn thing. Like, it's to me, it's like Gatorade is like this thing that people just drink as a drink, and you taste the drink, but it doesn't really do the thing that it needs to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the exact opposite of what you do. It's like, hey, like, this is complex, this drink isn't, basically, right? And it's like, you don't. I remember the first time I gave my wife something like a Skratch from like a hangover or something, and she was like, I can't taste it, but it makes me feel better. And it's just like, like, it's complex, where you're used to this drink where you're tasting the thing that isn't actually going to help you, and it's not that my wife gets a lot of hangovers. That was a bad example, but it's like, it's interesting how this thing we need, like, I learned this when I was in Japan. Like, the Japanese love to hear their phones click because they know that it's there. When you close the door, there's a thing that's put in so that you can actually hear that thing done. When you're eating something or drinking something, it's almost like, hey, I want to taste this thing.
Yeah.
And that's more important than the effect of that thing. Where with Skratch, it's like, hey, we don't care about that aspect. We want to make sure that what it's supposed to do, it does. And I know that was like a long run-on sentence of how it works, but it's...
Well, I think that,
true.
You know, the human body is extraordinarily complex.
Sure.
And physiology is complex. And we're trying to solve these complex problems, but we're trying to do so with very, very simple solutions. You know, it begs to this principle in science called Occam's razor, which is this idea that all things being equal, the simplest solution is always the right one. And it also bears to the idea that while we might be very complicated people, our needs are extremely simple.
Mm-hmm.
And talking about hydration, for example, during exercise, in principle, all you need is a little bit of energy, and you need simple sugars at that point, because you need to be able to absorb that as quickly as possible to keep your blood sugar up. But you also need to replace the water that you're losing in sweat, as well as the sodium that you lose in your sweat. And when you do so, your body knows how to take care of itself. And so it's very interesting, because when you think about something even like thirst, right? Being thirsty. Thirst is an extraordinarily complex physiological mechanism that has, you know, perhaps potentially hundreds of different inputs. That being said, there are two principal things that dictate our thirst. One is our blood volume. So if you get stabbed or if you get shot, and there are a lot of Hollywood tropes that get this right, where someone gets shot and they're just like, Joey, I'm so thirsty, because they're bleeding out, right? Water, you know, they start asking for water. The other side of it is that if you lose water and your blood gets more salty, you also get thirsty. And during exercise, this volume component doesn't come into play because your heart's beating so fast and you got this big blood pressure. So now your body is relying on this salt concentration, and your body would rather keep the salt concentration correct over the volume. And so if you're just drinking plain water, but you're losing all this sweat that has salt in it, your thirst mechanism is going to keep you from drinking all the water that you lost, because it doesn't want you in an environment where there's not as much salt to be diluting the pool with an excess amount of water, right? And so by adding the salt that you lose and being more accurate about those measures, you effectively tune your thirst mechanism so that now you're naturally drinking what you need to drink. And that's the basis of a sports drink. It's really, in some ways, that simple and yet that complex, is that we're simply trying to tune your own intuition, your thirst mechanism, to match what you're actually losing without hurting your body. And maybe the adage is simply, if you replace what you lose, you're fine. And so, like, when you talk about energy bars and other nutrition products, if you're burning a certain amount of calories and the composition is X amount of carb and X amount of fat, maybe a tiny bit of protein, well, then let's just give you what you're losing in real time. and hopefully your body will know what to do with the rest of it.
I would like to touch base on the culture of your company, because it seems like you're pretty light. You joke, you keep everything positive, but at the same time, things have to be pretty, really serious in terms of to hit those growth targets. And then, balancing that with hiring the right people or working with the right people.
Yeah.
How did you go about establishing that culture and continuing to move in the direction that you want to move the company?
I think one of the big pieces of establishing our culture occurred through a very simple question that we started asking in the team a few years into the business, when we realized that our culture wasn't what we wanted it to be. And so we started asking this question: who are we when we're actually our best? We all acknowledge that we have good days and bad days. We have days where we're above the line, days when we're below the line, right? And so you start saying, well, when I actually am not ashamed of who I am, and I know that I did a good job as opposed to a really shitty one, what were the attributes that I was able to hold on to for those moments? And as we started asking, folks in our own company this, what started to occur was we started getting answers that were very contradictory to one another, right? So we started getting, for example, one answer that was about authenticity and about being real and about having the capacity to be ourselves. And yet there were often times when we were ourselves and we just spoke our own feelings, that we weren't being empathetic and that we were being jerks, right? And so all of a sudden, this other attribute of, well, yeah, we can be authentic, we can be real, but we can also have this real empathy, for others, and this kind of patience to understand at the same time. And those developed into value sets that began to create tension and oppose one another, right? There was this other value set where, most of us coming from athletic backgrounds, we're very performance oriented, we're very driven, and, we liked having structure, accountability, and process. At the same time, like you mentioned, I'm a pretty casual dude and pretty loosey-goosey at times, and more of a dreamer. And, I like to have a certain amount of space and freedom. And so we started realizing that each of us needed one another to hold each other accountable, that there was this idea of being able to ask for help, and that you couldn't rest this whole company on one person. And another value set of doing this together came up. And as we started to define these value sets, and as we started to make decisions based upon this value set, as opposed to just our business goals, we started to find that we were a lot more consistent in the way that we broke ties. Meaning that you always come to a point in a business where you have to make a decision to go left or right. And all the pros and all the cons seem to match each other from an intellectual or a business standpoint. When you come to those ties, if you can break them consistently based on a belief system or on value sets, then all of a sudden people in your own company and your customers see you behave in a very consistent way. And whatever that is, that develops trust. It's not that you have to be one way or another way. You have to be a consistent way, right? You have to be a way that people can understand. And as we started to be a consistent way, I think that's when our culture really started to develop. And I would characterize our culture as being a curious one, a culture where we want to try to get better, a culture based around self-improvement and based around learning. And it's also a culture based around hospitality and service, trying to do our best to take care of others.
A quick follow-up on that, because as we're coming close to the 60-minute mark, one of the things I actually dreamt about this Sunday night.
Oh,
so you talked about the should culture. So for those that aren't aware, we send a questionnaire out to folks that are going to be guests, so that we can kind of follow an outline of what our guests want to talk about. And one of the questions that is asked is, why should somebody listen? And Allen came back and checked us on that and was like,
greatest answer ever.
Oh man, I like to the point, and I love being challenged. And you challenged me to the point where I legitimately dreamt about it, and it was like, man, we got to change this. So, can you touch on the word should and the should culture that you've instilled within Skratch Labs?
I got triggered by that question because I got triggered by the word should. And there are three grammatical mood states in the English language. There is the indicative, where you just point something out, like, oh, that dog pooped on the ground. There is the imperative, where there's a sense of urgency and chaos in it, where you're like, oh my God, the dog pooped on the ground, right? And then there is the subjunctive mood state, which is the most powerful mood state, which is what's also known as the imaginary mood state, where we're like, what if the dog pooped on the ground, right? And we can imagine and dream. While imagining and dreaming is probably one of the most important qualities that we have as human beings, there is both a positive subjunctive as well as a negative subjunctive. And the negative subjunctive is when we find ourselves mired in imaginary fear, in regret, in complaint. And so there's this adage that the real danger is imagined, not real, right? That we make things up in our heads all the time. And the word should is a really, really interesting and bizarre placeholder for the negative subjunctive mood, meaning that we say should when we are in a state of inaction or impasse. We say should when we bump into someone at the grocery store and we're like, hey, we should get together. And we have no intent to ever follow through on that, right? The military did this linguistic study where they found that one of the words that predicted mission failure was the word should. Should we attack? Should we not attack? Should we negotiate for peace? Well, that's a very different statement than we are negotiating for peace, right? Whenever I want to say should, and this is something that is part of our ethos at Skratch, whenever somebody on my team wants to say should, I challenge them by asking them, what are you really trying to communicate, right? Is there something that you intend to have as an outcome, right? And what ends up happening is that you either, don't say anything, or you reframe what your real intents are. And I'm really proud of the fact that at Skratch, nowhere in any of our written documentation, etc., do we ever use the word should. I think it's so challenging, but if you challenge yourself for a day to correct that language, it's incredible what happens. It's incredible how much you let go of in some ways, right? Like, there should be more parking at my Whole Foods parking lot. Right? It is what it is, right? I'm going to ride my bike next time.
No, I dig that. And as soon as Tim had sent me the questionnaire, I saw your response. And Tim has talked about the word should and coulds and all that stuff before. So it really, it was interesting to reflect on that. And I'm glad that was able to be relayed here. So I think of field marketing in a way where you look at it from a go to this region, this style of event, an Ironman race, this type of whatever. But when I think about it from an online perspective, I think of field marketing as maybe a Strava, which has seen crazy growth. I think they have 96 million or something accounts now. I don't know what that is from a daily active user account, but a ton, right? And I remember seeing an interview where they were something like 3 million new users or signups throughout the pandemic, which is incredible growth for something like them. Tim and I are religious on there. It's a great platform. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 months ago, you did a huge giveaway where you were going to give a $20 bag away, right. 20 servings away. Like, is that, how do you make a bet on a region, a city, a platform? And what are you doing in there to make sure that the money that you're about to lose to invest to get into something like that, you can see come full circle? And I want to also add this to this. I buy a $20 bag, right? I'm not drinking Skratch every day because I'm not using it in the way that I need, maybe I need to be using it every day. And that's the answer. But like, I know that if I'm doing 61 minutes or more, I'll drink Skratch that day, right? Yeah. But if I'm not going to. So most people don't drink Skratch on a daily basis. So how are you kind of formulating all that into it to figure out, hey, we're going to invest however much money into this to make sure that we're going to get that back in the long run?
Yeah, I would say this. You do it by using slow math. And slow math is that you make those bets incrementally based upon whatever data set that you have in the moment. And so, for example, when the pandemic first started, we made a small bet on Strava where we, decided, hey, this is enough money to be able to literally test what our return might be. And if we lose this money, it's going to be okay. From that data set, we got a really good return, and we got a return that we could actually measure because it was digital. And that's maybe the distinction between digital marketing and, say, field marketing. Field marketing is truly a bet because you don't understand or you can't necessarily track what the return on that. But digital bets do have some metric of return, whether it's an extra email, whether it's being able to track whether a consumer comes back and buys again through that email address, et cetera. And so because of the significance of email tracking and knowing what a customer does with that behavior in the digital world, it becomes a much more calculable than, say, the field marketing world does. And it's very interesting because people do live in real physical space, but they do live in a digital space. And what the pandemic taught us was how to really access the digital worlds that people began to move to or live in, right? And so based upon the small bet we took on Strava in 2020, we took a larger bet and realized that if we could actually give away a whole bag, that we might be able to do X, Y more. Get more new customers effectively. And both of those turned out. And I think that we weren't just lucky, but we were slow in how we approached it, right? So slow math.
Well, on the flip side, though, one of the things that was so impressive was how fast you were from the shipping standpoint. I mean, you put that order in, it's just like, bam, that thing is out the door, and it's really impressive.
Last year, we averaged something like 99.9% same day throughput. Now, 4 p.m. And that's a metric that we measure. That's a metric that our fulfillment team is extraordinarily proud of, and it gets tracked. And it's an important metric on our scorecard. Next to that metric is mispacks, and of that, how much do we screw up? And our mispack rate is like maybe 0.3, 0.4%, which is, I think, significant. We're going to keep on working on that, but net, we do really, really well.
I am not in that statistic, so good on that. But the customer service team, the packing team, I mean, they do a tremendous job where they'll put a couple stickers in there. Typically, they'll sign something. Like it's little things where I've just been like, oh, that's good. And so it should be the standard. It's not, so it becomes the anomaly in there, and it's always good to see something like that.
We didn't know in business when we first started that you could hire these fulfillment centers to fulfill product for you. So we thought that we had to do it ourselves. We had no experience. And so this whole entire time, maybe out of ignorance, we have built our fulfillment team with the rest of our team living in the same space the whole entire time. And our warehouse team lives in the same space as the rest of our office. Half of it is the warehouse, the other half is the office. And from a customer experience standpoint, it allows us to very quickly change orders, to very quickly put out orders, to be able to sign these notes, put the stickers in, and then allows us a little accounting system on our invoices that's coded that allows us to know, well, how many times has this person purchased? Are they a new customer? Are they an old customer, etc.? And our warehouse team can look up people, understand their buying history. We have notes about their buying history, etc. And they become really familiar with customers through that mechanism because it's all happening in the same facility.
That's very powerful. So someone like a Gwen, a sponsorship with Olympic athlete Gwen Jorgensen, probably just butchered her last name. She just moved to Boulder too, by the way, I believe. Is that a relationship that is a similar answer to the Strava one, where it's just a calculator risk with having sponsorships or having sponsored athletes? Like how do you look at
those are very different. I think we look at sponsorship not in terms of return, and I don't think that those are very calculable. And I think that we sponsor athletes because we love athletes. We sponsor athletes because we care. We sponsor athletes because we want them to succeed. And we know that without our patronage, they wouldn't have the same chances of success, because oftentimes we are working in niche sports that don't have common revenue streams or ticket sales, right? And so I think that for us, we're only going to sponsor an athlete if we actually fundamentally care about their performance as people and can divorce that from whether or not they're going to increase sales from us. Yes, there is a positive effect on our brand in terms of credibility and association, but more importantly, I think it allows us to enjoy ourselves and have fun and have some pride around what our products can do for the most elite athletes in the world. More importantly, for me, it creates a test bed where they drive the product innovation. And so our athletes are so important because having come from that world and having designed these products to work with those athletes and make those athletes better, they're fundamental to our product development, right? And we're not going to make a product unless it is something that an athlete at that very elite level wants and has maybe a problem that they're trying to solve around that. So I don't think that sponsorship for us functions in the tit for tat way that many companies often view it at the larger commercial scale. For us, it's much more human, and it's much more about product development, and it's much more about our own sense of pride and joy.
I'm fascinated. We started the show with, you make money, you continue to make more product to make more money, and now you're tracking metrics in terms of how fast you get stuff shipped immediately and wrong
Sure.
orders. What do you do as the leader of this company to stay sharp and to continue to learn CEO type things, as your business matures?
The biggest single thing that I've learned to do is listen to my team. Everything I've talked about was something that was taught to me by someone I hired, right? Or taught to me by Ian McGregor, who's our CEO, who was with me from the very beginning. And I know a lot about science. I don't know a lot about business, but listening to them, trusting them, and letting them be great at their jobs and being a student instead of a teacher has been the most important thing that I can do as a founder of a company. And that humility is super hard at times, but it's super important. And I try to go into every conversation and ask myself, like, hey, how is what they're saying true, better than what I'm thinking, and more, meaningful to the growth of our business? And almost always it works out, right? I think there are a couple of books that are fundamental to our growth as well. One is Traction by Gino Wickman. The EOS model, the entrepreneurial operating system, is how we base all of our meetings, our scorecards, our business plan, our operating systems. There's the book 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership that we onboard with our team as well, in terms of, our culture and behavior. And then there's like the Zingerman books, right, on how to run a deli, right? And something as simple as that is really powerful.
I mean, I would think that, certainly, how is it when, from a chemistry or a science point of view, where you have in your mind where you want this product to go, and then you hire somebody how do you challenge them at the same time, listen to them to make sure that you're staying true to the Skratchman, point of view?
Yeah. I think that what we try to do is try to make sure that facts and stories are congruent, right? Like, there is a story about, replacing the electrolytes you lose in sweat, but there's also a fact about it, right? And we can't just say that. It actually has to be real. And where I challenge, say, my sales or marketing team is for them to tell the truth, even if the truth isn't convenient about a product. That, yeah, look, if you drink this when you're sitting on the couch playing video games, it's probably going to increase your risk for type 2 diabetes. So this is bad. But if you're using this in the middle of a marathon, this is good, right? And embracing that contradiction and saying, yeah, there are real cases where this stuff and this ingredient panel and this nutrition profile is really, really bad for you. But there are situations in the right context where this is really good for you.
And I've seen that in some of your videos too, where you say, hey, like, I'd rather you find the thing that works.
Yeah.
I hope it's Skratch, but if it's not, I'd rather you find the thing that's going to help fulfill you in the thing that you're trying to do. And you don't hear a lot of businesses say that. So, I mean, I
think that there's a reason why other businesses exist. I think there's a reason why we have competition. Other companies do a great job, and there's a lot that we can learn from them. Our competitors push us, and they do a great job as well. And so we have to get out of the scarcity mindset, and we have to start worrying about running our own race as opposed to what other people are doing. That's when you become unique, right? Like in a world that is so convoluted and has so many things that are trying to get our attention, I think the best thing that we can do is just be who we are.
If I was to get on YouTube and look up Aaron Foster Skratch comedy sketch, am I going to see it, or is that not? Do you ever do it?
Aaron, he is so awesome, and because of his kind of acting, art background, etc., kind of did so many videos for us. He was kind of our front man for a while when I was, out on the road. So he was kind of our digital front man, and I was kind of our field front man. And it was a ton of fun. And yeah,
and he gave you the best business advice ever. It sounds like.
Oh yeah, and he was
spend more money than it's in the bank.
He was so important to, starting this business, because he was willing to roll up his sleeves and really just get work done. And he didn't have the pride that he couldn't just be in a warehouse packing boxes all day. We had this kind of glass front Pearl Street location when we first started, and Ian, our CEO, his dad was a police officer in Boulder and would often drive by our place to pop in and look in and make sure everything was good. And one day Aaron was the only guy packing in the warehouse, and he was working so hard that he literally passed out working, and Ian's dad found him passed out laying on the ground, and he had to be taken to the hospital, and the ambulance came, the whole entire bit, right? And it's just like, who does that? Like, maybe that was too much. I'm like, Foster, what are you doing? Like, Ian's dad just found you passed out laying on the warehouse floor. Like, what the hell is going on? But that was the level of commitment that people gave. That was the level of, I think, care that sometimes you need to start a business.
Very powerful. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to talk about or mention?
No, I don't know. I think it's all good. We could talk forever about this stuff, because this is, in part business and part life. And it's, I think, fun to try to inspire others to know that they can do what they want. It just takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of people. And that maybe if I were to just say anything, you can't do this stuff alone. There is no quote unquote being a hero in this game. Right.
Powerful.
Yeah, really appreciate your time. This has been a fast hour.
Yeah, no problem.
I appreciate it. If I'm ever in Boulder, I definitely would love to stop by and maybe see you at a field event, maybe work out, something like that. I don't know. Until next time, appreciate it. And thanks for listening, y'all.